Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. And you can also sign up. And we'll send you an email on how to sign up again. You can become part of the group. First hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about our audio setups. So the panel we all have different mics and different interfaces, and we'll talk about what we use and why we use them. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we're going to talk about a $5,000 studio. We talked about $20,000 last week, and Tony said, why don't we do five? So we're going to do a $5,000 studio. What would we get? So think about that for the panelists and for the producers. And then on Thursday, of course, Office Hours 2.0 update. We'll talk about where we are in the progress. And then Friday, we'll talk about getting the most out of Office Hours. And we do this every once in a while just to kind of keep people up to date on what we're doing and how to get the most out of it. Saturday, of course, is the long day, and we have education at 8 o'clock. Last 2 hours, it's such a great conversation. If you're into education, and even if you're just interested in education, wow, what an incredible group of people that come together for 2 hours at 8 o'clock. But we don't broadcast it. It's only on Zoom. But you should. I'd highly recommend checking it out. It's quite a collection and quite a conversation. At noon, we'll go back to Todd Reynolds' house doing the Belfast method. So we'll be doing a remote takeover and taking over all of Todd's hardware and streaming things out. We're constantly pushing that down the path, and that'll be at noon. And there's a separate link for that. So take a look at the emails that we send out every morning. And by the way, if you haven't looked at the emails we send out every morning, they're now 2 weeks in advance. So it's a big move for us. So you can see all of next week as well as all of this week. So next week doesn't have the descriptions. It just has some links for you to know what's coming. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we got?
Good morning, Alex. The first thing comes from our friend Guy Cochran here in the panel in Seattle, and he said, what's the difference between H.264 and H.265, and why do you use or not use one or the other?
Go ahead, Alex.
I know this is sounds a bit obvious, but H.265 is a newer version of H.264. They've got different patent pools associated with them and different amounts of money it costs for people to include them with their operating systems. So H.265 requires a more powerful computer for playing it back, quite a lot more powerful than H.264. The details, I haven't bothered to find out any more than that. H.265, H.266 is actually already proposed as a new version, but it did take 8 or 9 years for H.265 to become popular from when it was first proposed. I mainly use H.264 because I never know what my clients are looking at, and they don't really know what kind of computer they have or what kind of browser they're using. So I actually go for the older one because H.264 is perfectly good for what I'm doing, which is usually HD. And not above that when I'm sending versions out of what I'm doing, temporary versions.
Go ahead, Courtney.
The difference is one. It goes one more, you see. No, the H.265 is now referred to a lot of places as HEVC, or high efficiency video codec. It is a much more efficient codec, and it can squeeze about 57% less bits to achieve the same resolution in compression, so it's used more for 4K transmission. It does have a heavier load, as Alex was saying, on your encoder and decoder, especially on the encoder. But most decoders are now including HEVC codecs, and most TVs and set-top boxes and so on are now including HEVC on the decode side. So as the hardware gets more and more efficient, it becomes encoded. It becomes built into video codecs that are handled in hardware in your video card. So then it will become more common.
Go ahead, John.
Everything that Courtney just said. In addition, the licensing for MPEG for HVAC, right, from the MPEGLA group, is more expensive than MPEG-4 was. And that's the problem with this, is the licensing. It's a licensing nightmare. And that's the reason why Apple and Google and Netflix and everybody else started open media consortium for AV1.
It's just not scalable. Like you when you're a company like Facebook or Google, it doesn't make sense for you to do something that's proprietary like that. It's just too expensive. So that's the real problem with HEVC, and why it's still popular to do things with H.264. HEVC also supports 10-bit, which means you can do things like HDR. You can't do that in H.264. So it's really, if you're It's the more modern version, but more expensive version of what we're doing. And it's been out for a while. Blackmagic infamously released that 32 recorder in 2016, so 5 years ago, recording to HEVC. That's all it did. And we bought 2 of them thinking, well, it's got to do H.264 as well. Nope, just H.265, and no one could open any of the files. So a lot of us just sat with those recorders on our desk for 2 years until Blackmagic said, well, let's do a firmware update and let you do H.264. So it's it's sometimes one step ahead you're a leader, and 2 steps ahead you're a martyr. so anyway, they were 2 steps ahead in that case. Next question.
Lucas Herzog in Mainz, Germany is up next. And Lucas says, got my new Mac Mini M1 today. Any recommendations for a USB or Thunderbolt device to add a second video output, either HDMI or DisplayPort?
Go ahead, Chris.
Lucas, you're in luck. You said a second display. So all you really need is a cable. You just need a USB-C or Thunderbolt 3, it might be 4, cable to another HDMI on the other end of it. And that's the easiest way to add the second display.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
That was a sharp answer there, Chris. I like that. But the other way to do it is that OWC, otherwise known as Mac Sales, is coming out with a new M1 device that fits right under your M1 computer and provides HDMI and like a ton of a ton of Thunderbolt 4 C type connectors on it. So it's going to come out sometime in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and you definitely want to get to something that is potentially will give you HDMI. I do exactly what Chris is talking about with my minis, but being able to have something that gives you a whole bunch of extra outputs as well as the HDMI is useful. Next question.
Alex Goldner here on the panel from London in the UK. I wasn't able to be in after hours at 2 p.m. Pacific time. What did I miss?
Afraid we can't talk about it. So this is gonna be what happens. There's gonna be after hours. That was a session that we can't talk about while we're recording. So but we will try to move them. We'll probably try to do them in the mornings. Next time we have that our guest on, we'll try to do it in the morning so that it's more applicable. It was just the time that we could do it at the time. So anyway,
about tech stuff.
We talked about tech things. It was very geeky. So anyway, that was, but we'll hopefully do more of those. And again, sometimes we won't be able to, the reason it was in after hours is because we can't talk about it here. All right. Next question.
Next one comes from Bo Cordell in Charleston. Wait a second. Yes, Bo Cordell in Charleston somehow cycled on me. I have a nice Canon 24-70 EF lens. I'm interested in putting it on a new Blackmagic camera, but I need to get it into an SDI switcher. Should I explore the studio line or go with the Pocket 6K and convert the HDMI to SDI?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'd say to go ahead and get the Pocket. It's more popular by far than the studio line, just because a lot of people like to go out and shoot in the field, and the studio camera is kind of a one-trick pony. You just bite the latency, because that's really what we're talking about. Is you're going to have a little bit of conversion there, and if it doesn't matter, which I'm supposing a few milliseconds aren't going to matter in that conversion from SDI to or from HDMI to SDI. So I'd get it, and that's a great package. That's the same one that I use at the office at 24-70. So if you have any more questions about it, or you want to see it, ping me in after hours. I'll be in the office later today.
Go ahead, Sky.
And if you got the 4K version, you would have to get the adapter. So yeah, your EF lens will fit right nicely on the 6K.
Yeah, and I'll lean towards a larger sensor size. So that I think that's useful as well. Next question.
TJ Asher in the panel, occasionally, not today, I don't think, from Minneapolis, Minnesota, says yesterday's Office Hours 2.0 stream started out with reds super saturated, such that almost everyone looked like a fully cooked lobster on my Apple TV. About 20 minutes in, things changed and were more normal. What was changed in the stream to fix the saturation issue?
So I was explaining to someone online how to fix something on an FSHDR, and the way to get I had to tell them turn all these things off, and I was trying to list it, and the one that I opened up on my home computer was the one that we use for office hours. So I turned off all the LUTs, so that I could explain this is what you should see when you're using your FSHDR, and then I forgot to turn them back on again. So what you were seeing was 709, just a straight 709 going through and being converted. What happens when it takes 709, which looks full featured here, but then it just stretches it all out because it's the elemental in the cloud is saying this is an HDR10 signal. So YouTube just goes, sure. And it just stretches the whole thing out, from that position. And so anyway, so it will look nuclear if you do that. So anyway, that's what happened. And then I realized what you saw was when I looked down and actually got my camera up 20 minutes into the show and started looking at it, I was like, oh no, I forgot to turn the settings back on. And I turned the setting back on in the FS HDR back to HDR10. So in that I said, transform this from 709 to PQ. And then you saw it go back to something that looks more normal. So that was the behind the scenes of what happened there. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is up next. I'm getting a Raspberry Pi. It'll be my first to run PlayoutBee. Which one would the panelists recommend?
Go ahead, John.
I have two of the Raspberry Pi 4s, and I've been buying the 400s because they have better cooling than the 4. The 4 runs super hot. If I put my case on my 4, it goes into protection mode, and I have to take the case off. The 400 has better cooling, but it doesn't take as much RAM, but it runs PlayoutBee perfectly.
I go with John Pruitt.
So yeah, I was going to say I do recommend the Raspberry Pi 4. I did get a case with a fan on it, but it is fairly reasonably priced. I would go and get the 4 gigabyte model. Don't think you need the 8 for PlayoutBee, but if you've got other things, it could be useful, and you can use it for other projects as well. You don't just have to stick with using it for the PlayoutBee, but it's a good project to start with.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Buy once, cry once. And for Pi, that's really not that bad. So get the 8 gig. And then there are some good add-on boards. The one I recommend is the POE add-on board. So you can only have one cable going into the Pi. There's also an SSD attachment, so you can put in more videos and have it really run as a beast.
Next question.
Next one comes from our friend Andy Carluccio in Washington, D.C., and he says Circles for Zoom announced that they are closing down effective December 10th. And did anyone manage to try it out while it was alive?
Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, I did. And yes, it was very evasive. And I uninstalled it almost the same day I used it. I did read their goodbye letter. Yes, they're returning the money to those that did pay, and they're very grateful for all those that did support, and they learned a lot. But yeah, it was that experience.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we're seeing, other than what Liminal has done, and because I think that the difference with, and I know that Andy asked this question, but I think that the reason that ZoomOSC made a lot more sense to us and why we used it and what it really came from was someone who worked on events a lot. So someone who worked on, a group that works on lots of events, creating a product meant that it was really good for events. I think that the real challenge is that circles and I think macro is getting absorbed as well. Is that they are written by people who have good ideas, but haven't actually done it. And I'll keep on coming back to practical knowledge is 10 times more valuable than theoretical knowledge. So people who come up with an idea, a business idea, if it's not based in some form of experience, they're really in an uphill battle, to figure out the best way to execute something. And a lot of these, when I looked at them, I was like, I don't know practically how I would use this. I just don't so that's been the challenge with all of these, have been somewhere between, I don't know how to use it, or I would never use it. So that's, I think that's the real challenge. And you see this even with things like Hover. Hover does their own events, and they literally, from the pieces that I've seen of Hover, and that's what it feels like, pieces of a plane rolling down the runway. So when Hover screws up their own events, you're like, they don't know what they're doing. Like they don't take what they're doing very seriously. They're not run by event companies, like event people, that care about every piece, every aspect of the experience. And so I just, so I think that a lot of these companies are really challenged by the fact that they're not dog fooding or fish fooding or whatever you want to call it, their own products. And they didn't come from that background. They came from I'm going to write a business plan and raise some money. And you got people that are excited about it to put money into it. And that's, we're going to see, and that's what happens in every industry. And a couple of them figure it out, or a couple of them had the right background. and everybody else, gets absorbed. And, it happened with the railroads, it happened with oil, it happened, it happens with telecommunications. All of those things all do the same thing. And we're just in that process right now. Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania says, a friend showed me Resolume. It looks similar to Isadora. Does anyone have any experience with it? And what are the use cases?
Go ahead, John.
I presume you mean Resolume Arena, which is designed primarily for the VJ market. And so they synchronize these audio loops to, visualization you would see at a club or a party. They do have projection mapping built in it. That's what I used to do my Christmas lights at my house for projection mapping. And then just recently, within the last couple of months, they released Wire, which was their node-based editor, but it doesn't do everything that Isadora does.
Next question.
Next one comes from Guy Cochran in Seattle. Guy's back with, how does Office Hours 2.0 stream flow in HDR from the studio to AWS and out to YouTube?
Yeah, so what we do is we have the Zoom, basically in Zoom, we have Zoom ISO pushing 4 signals out of every Mac Mini. So there's 4 ISO signals that go out of every Mac Mini, and then they go into, then they're put into the switcher. Now, right now, those signals all go to, they go into a program, and that program is then sent to an FSHDR. The FSHDR upscales from 709, Rec 709, which is what we're all in right now, to PQ. So it just stretches our colors out. And you'll notice it in some soft grays and everything else. You'll see posterization because we're taking a WebRTC 8-bit signal and stretching it to HDR. But that gets done in the hardware in the FS Then that signal's returned back to a elemental UHD link, which is then that pipes that signal up to, and that link is capable of both the 10-bit that we need for that path, as well as up to 16 channels, which we're not using yet. But we will be. And then once we get into Media Live, I define that as an HDR10 feed, 4K HDR10 feed inside of the output to YouTube. And then in YouTube, that's sent. It's an HLS, and it's a very specific HLS. The interaction between Media Live and YouTube took a couple of days and lots of emails to figure out. I'm happy to share it. If someone pings me, I'll send you the JSON. But you can't just cut and paste the HLS from YouTube into Media Live like you think you would, because they interpret that differently. So you have to change the JSON to actually get it to sync up. And I have it. I know I sent it to Jim, has it as well, and probably knows it better, understands it more than I do. I just kind of hacked through it until it worked. Jim probably actually understands what I did. So anyway, so that gets to YouTube. Then YouTube streams it out, and so that's that's how that whole pipeline works. And I think that we're probably, well, especially with HDR10, we're probably the only ones in the world doing it at the moment. Go ahead, Guy.
Will the original, thanks for sharing that. Will the original Elemental, the orange not standard definition, but HD version work with the HDR once it's stretched?
Well, I could probably take the current one if I made it a 1080p signal, which I could theoretically push it out of the little Elemental link and send it up as 8-bit, and then just tell it something different, there, and just say this is a HDR10 output. And if it was mapped as HDR10 on the throughput, it would come out the other end as HDR10. It may or may not look as good. There's metadata being added to the HDR10. The big thing between HLG and HDR10 is HLG doesn't have any metadata. It's just like, this is the curve I have, and HDR10 has metadata that goes with that PQ curve. And right now, I don't know if the metadata matters because we're not analyzing it in the same way that you would do, for a proper HDR10. The other thing is that what we're getting ready to do, the graphics, we're making sure that the graphics are able to be generated in 10-bit. So the playouts to what we're doing and everything else will be in 10-bit. There's some complexities to that right now. We can't, there's a whole complex piece of this puzzle, which is that what we really have to do is convert everybody to HDR before they go back into the switcher, so that including the 10-bit, so everything comes in as HDR in the switcher, because that way we can merge HDR footage and graphics in with all of us being converted to an HDR curve, at the same time. So while we look, I will argue that if you have an HDR screen and you look at our 2.0, we look really good in it. I mean, for people who are lit well and have the right colors, it just pops. People who don't, it looks a little bit different. But it just, we're figuring all of that stuff out. But what will work, what you do see is some of the graphics, even now, just taking the 709 and promoting it, looks pretty cool. Like it's some of it flashes, and that's what we're going to be experimenting with all of December. What kind of colors we can make it look just like wow, And so we want to do kind of wow moments. I'm probably going to use the countdown clocks at the beginning. We're probably going to have lots of different ones that are all like places like the countdown clocks, the sweepers, things like that. The little graphics that we use all during the show will be pretty basic, but still hopefully jump out. But when we play with things that are full screen, we're going to try to stretch the envelope in that area. And then, we want to keep on, no one else that I know of is doing a daily show in HDR10. So with lots of different sources that they don't control and, in an uncontrolled environment. So I have a feeling that over the next couple of months, we're going to know as much or more than about HDR10 broadcasting than almost anybody else out there. And again, because we have also the freedom, we're not in we don't have to have 40 meetings to change the graphics, so we'll be able to constantly evolve and innovate, while we're doing that. And then we're hoping that, Zoom will follow along and give us 4K 10-bit transports, which would be really cool. So anyway, I so far that's kind of hit a wall. I suggest things like that, and then people change the subject. Anyway, they don't even talk about it. So we'll see what happens. Next question.
Next one comes from Andy Carluccio in Washington, D.C., and he says, any thoughts on buying macro I/O? Seems like a rough moment for Zoom, seeing as they poured a lot of PR resources into the macro team at Zoomtopia, only to have the product sunset before end of year.
I think this is the same problem as that. I mean, I don't even get I have to admit that I still feel like they're a unicorn looking for a field. So I don't know if they're going to even be successful, but they seem to be enough traction to absorb somebody else. The macro thing, I will say it was kind of cool to have the folks on. I wasn't clear that I would ever use the product. I don't think they're not solving the right problem. The problem is not putting lipstick on pigs. The problem is creating genuine conversation, that's undistracted by all the other stuff that's going on. And what we keep on doing is seeing, tricks, trick plays rather than just a solid run game and a solid passing game. Go ahead, Jeffrey. Sorry for the sports reference.
Oh, it sounds good. So yeah, if you put an overlay, if you create a program, you put your business creating an overlay over another program, that's just kind of, you're either expecting the company to say, hey, we love this so much that we're going to buy your system, or you just take your chances at that point, because they could go off in a different direction. Next thing you know, these things just don't work. Even Zoom ISO is a little bit in risk of having that happen, that if Zoom decided, hey, we're going to go this way instead of this way, that it'll either be a mad scramble to get it fixed, or that's it for the company.
Yeah, I mean, external. Yeah, again, you're right that creating external dependencies is pretty dangerous unless you have a lot of confidence that they'll continue to move forward. I have a lot of confidence in ISO. Rupert.
And when we looked at it before, they were clearly exploring some technology and doing some things. I just wondered at that time whether their goal was to get acquired and just pass it on.
It's rare for a startup to want to be acquired early. so that's not usually the business model, because I don't think Mmhmm had the money to pay what I'm sure that they had. Their original business plan had outlined what they were going to make. So I think that they probably weren't finding the resource, the uptake fast enough for them to raise more money. And I think a lot of that had to do with instability of, if you're building a bunch of things for Zoom. What we haven't seen yet is, everyone thought we were all going to COVID's over. We're all going to go back to normal. And what we haven't really seen the effects of is the behavioral change within users yet. I think when we come out of this, whenever that happens, I have no idea now when that's going to actually happen. But when we come out of it, we're going to notice that a lot of people have new behaviors. It's not like they're going to some of them will be dying to go back. In fact, probably a majority will be dying to go back to to in-person events and, all this other stuff. But a large enough minority, if it's 30%, 35%, that change their behavior, most of those events aren't sustainable. It doesn't have to be a majority that decides to go a direction. It just has to be a large enough minority to thump the overhead. Next question.
Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York, up next. And he asks, is there a quick way of trimming or editing MP4 videos? QuickTime will only export MOVs, and exporting in Premiere can take a very long time, he notes.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Get a faster graphics card that supports H.264 encoding in hardware. The problem is H.264 is a long group of pictures, so it has an iframe, which has all the data in a single frame, and then it has predictive frames, or progressive frames, sometimes called, that have only the changes from that iframe. So if you're trimming and you want to trim it to a frame that's other than an iframe, it's going to have to redo the compression for the entire file. So it's got to re-render that entire file anyway. So most editorial systems transcode stuff on the way in from their timeline to a mezzanine codec, and then when it's time to output it, it re-encodes it at whatever you tell it to encode it at, and it goes out. So there are some editors out there. I don't know, you Mac people that are going next can maybe tell us of one that will just cut on iframes and we'll do a quick output and encode for trimming. But I don't know of any right offhand for the Mac.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's tough to follow that technical of an explanation. It's a good one, Courtney. I think that, the idea of quick isn't necessarily translating to easier. I don't think you need speed. I think you need dependability and ease of use. And first, you didn't say whether you're using a Mac or a PC to do it. But generally, I like being able to just drop something into an edit program like Premiere. I know that there'll be some collective gasps when I say that. Premiere takes anything. Avid, on the other hand, is a little persnickety. If you don't have the add-on program for that particular program, it's not going to work so well. But ease of use and being able to make the editing, like Courtney says, because you might have a long gop in there and you're dealing with iframes and it might drift out of sync. I just use Premiere on a Mac.
Sky?
Yes, D, all of the above, what both these fine gentlemen have said, because you have to make a new video and you are going to get, because you're recompressing it, you're going to get a little bit of loss if you can see it at all. But maybe you could catch us on after hours, because there's a lot of missing parts to this question. Quick possible option is throw it to encoder or compressor and let that offload your workflow so you can still do something else while it's rendering in the background. But I don't know how to just trim something and not make a new video.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
If you're using Media Encoder and you're only doing tips and tails, then Media Encoder will allow you to set a start and an end point, and then you can just go from there. If you're actually doing an edit, instead of using Premiere, try Rush, because even if you just have Premiere, you're also able to get Rush put on that same computer. That's going to load a lot less plugins, a lot less programs, and might be a little bit faster for you to do your trims and get it out the door.
Is that product still out? Like, I haven't heard about Rush for a
Oh,
long
they're building
time.
on it. They're building on it because that's going to probably be what you're going to use for your iPad to do any video editing.
Sure. Like they did a huge push a couple of years ago with Rush, and everyone just went back to Enlighten and the core tools and iMovie. Like, they just kind of skipped over Rush, and I haven't seen Adobe make any traction with that. But it's cool. It's cool that they're still making it. Go ahead, Courtney.
I assumed he was on a Mac because he was talking about QuickTime, which doesn't work very well on Windows. But if you are on Windows, the Photos app, and very few people know this, the Photo app in Windows 10 and later, 10 and 11, actually edits video, and you can edit H.264, and you can set an in-point and out-point to trim within the Photos app, and it does a pretty decent job. And if you have a hardware encoder on your graphics card, and most Intels support H.264 in hardware these days, will do it.
MoveAVI.com is another one. It's an MP4 editor. In the past, we used that because it would cut. It would, in its early versions, it would cut on the keyframes. I don't know if it does anymore. I looked at the website and it looks like they've kind of moved past that. But it used to be able to cut. It would literally just snap to the keyframes and then it would just trim them and export them. It was a problem that we've had for a decade of how do we turn things over very quickly. The reality is most of these compressors are working so quickly that you don't need to. If I was just trimming, I would just go into, if you're on a Mac, I would just go into compressor and set my in and out points and hit go and put it back out as an MP4. So you can have a setting for it, and the time that it will take for compressor to recompress it will be, 5 times faster than real time on a modern computer. Next question.
Mitchell Hill is up next in Wilmington, Delaware, here on the panel. You're shooting a 2-person interview. How would you set the cameras, or would you record 4K and punch into the interview in post?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I would do a 3-camera shoot. I'd do the straight on between the two, and then I'd do an angled view for the host and an angled view for the guest. That way you see their face instead of their side of their face. Plus, with the social distancing, if you decide to do it that way, you're going to really might have to stretch everything out, which might end up pixelating the faces.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think the first question I would ask is, what do I want? What type of interview is it? Is it like a Barbara Walters sit down, I'm going to learn about your life? Or is it kind of an interview where you're sort of sitting side by side, really more two presenters? I think a lot of people end up trying to make that into an interview, and it's a really bad way to do it. I think the most important thing to do is you set up the people in a way that they're comfortable talking, and then you place your cameras. And I would go with what Jeffrey did. I like to see 2 eyes. I love to see 2 ears if possible as they're sitting facing each other. And one of the things that I always come back to and I remind people is that you could do a really nice interview in a long hallway. And the reason for it is you can get a whole lot of depth behind each person, and you probably don't need a lot of depth the other way because they're looking at each other. But yes, the center, Barbara Walters, 4 feet on the floor shot. It's a good look also.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and to Chris's point, are they talking to each other? And we as the audience are observing them having a conversation, or are they talking to the camera separately? And that's the critical question, because that's a stylistic thing. And that's what we're talking about here. It's a style. The jump cut of a thing is now an accepted style. Still makes me a little, in my mouth, but the challenge is we're old. Sorry. So that's where I still do shoot 4K, frame for it, knowing that I will not push in more than 130%. Also, with your second camera, you want to try to get at least 30% difference. Otherwise, you might as well just shoot 4K with one camera and just use that all the time.
Good, Bill.
I'm greedy. I want a 2-shot of the 2 of them from straight on, and then I want ISOs of each person, and I want a lot of B-roll so that I can do whatever I want. I can isolate on the person. I can do split edits where you're seeing the person who's listening as opposed to the person who's talking. I want a release shot so I can go back to that 2-shot whenever I get in trouble, or I just want to lower the emotional intensity of things. And then a lot of B-roll, because that helps you really tell the story if you can keep the audience engaged with something other than just talking heads.
I think punching in from a 4K looks cheap. Like it just looks cheap, and it's not professional. Like and I get people do it. They do it because they don't have the money for the other cameras. Like they're not doing it because there's a creative decision. They're doing it because I don't have 3 cameras. But if you have 3 cameras, you use 3 cameras. Now I strongly prefer, at this point, if you can get the quality connections, I really want to do it over Zoom or over Riverside or something like that, because I get to be in a position that I don't get to be in. When they're in a room, I get to be right between there, watching them look at each other and talk to each other. So people talking to each other through a teleprompter is, to me, the best way to do it. Even if you put them in the same room, we've done this where they talk to each other. We put them in 2 separate rooms and let them talk to each other through a teleprompter, and you're getting this eye contact directly. it's mesmerizing, like just mesmerizing. It can be a little overwhelming for the viewer at times because it's intimately connected to them, and it's all just close-up shots. But we've done some things where we shot that in 4K, and we shot it a little wider, so we had wider shots of them, so that we cut back and forth to wide and then cut into the close-up and then cut back to wide and then cut into the close-up. That gave you a little bit of a breath, but we did it literally 2 people in the same building just tied together with SDI, and they're just, one camera goes out and into the other teleprompter and crossover in Teratron. But instead of being an interviewer and interviewee, you're shooting both of them at the same time. In my opinion, as a viewer, by far the most compelling. Like, you can't stop watching it because they're looking right at you. But it's hard to get clients to. I've only done it like 3 or 4 times because clients think it's crazy. So you have to get over that. Next question.
Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York is up next. And Scott says, oops, it didn't. There we go. And it says, my ATEM Extreme ISO has been recently splitting my recordings into part 1 and part 2. It did not do this before. I'm using the same Samsung T5 1 terabyte drive, freshly formatted as macOS Extended Journaled. Anyone know why it would start doing this?
My guess is you did a firmware update and they've decided that it's more stable to create. It actually makes more sense to create periodic versions of this so you don't lose everything if the whole thing goes down. I don't know how it whether the ATEM doesn't have a battery to buffer itself that I know of. And so when you unplug it, it loses power immediately. It will stop writing that file, and oftentimes that file will not be readable. So my guess is the reason it's making part 1s and part 2s is to put and I think that they assume that if you're taking it into an edit system, that you will, especially in Resolve, it'll automatically put that back together, and probably in anything else that's pulling that in, it'll just put them into their own file. So I think that's what they're probably doing, but that's my guess. I don't know. I haven't had that experience yet. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida is up next. And Andy asks, has anyone used the Magewell Ultra Encode? Thoughts? I'm testing one out. RTMP, HLS, HDR, SRT, call, receive, and NDI HX for less than $400 US. So far, it seems great.
That seems awesome. So have you seen a guy at all? Have you
I use some Magewell devices for NDI conversion at our studio, and the Magewell device itself is great, but I haven't tried this Ultra Encode. We probably have one on the shelf. There's so many things to test, and now Universe is kind of sucking up my brain right now, so I haven't had a chance to play with this one.
Looks really interesting as far as a really 16-channel SDI embedded audio. Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out.
Last night in after hours, Tucker started talking about the Epiphan Pearl, which I started digging into that a little bit more. He showed us the back end, and I was super impressed with how you can actually tweak the SRT settings. So, you send this device to a contributor, and you have control over switching it from HDMI to SDI and things like that. So, while this one for $400 looks pretty amazing, I think if I was looking at one of those, I would also be looking at that Epiphan just because of the back end control. So, being able to use it from afar, unless you're just using it yourself, and you don't have to worry about that stuff. But it's definitely worth looking at if you're in that realm.
We should test it. I'd love to come back and look at Epiphan again. I used a lot of Epiphan hardware a decade ago and 5 years ago, and in both cases, the scars are so deep and painful that they hurt. Just hearing the name hurts. Like, it's just their level of quality control is so low. Or was.
Yeah, I'd written them off for a while there, and then I heard that there was an agency that's renting them out now as contribution machines. So, if they're that stable now that they're getting rented out for big shows, then that's a whole new ballgame. They've grown up.
Maybe. All right. It was like, I even worked with them directly, and the quality of listening was so low that that's why I wrote them off. We would tell them things and they just would act like that doesn't matter. And it was just like, okay, I'm not going to ever use this again. So anyway, that's all. It's just but they may have turned a corner, hired somebody new. Behringer turned a whole corner by buying Midas. So I'm open to it, but wow, it was a lot of bad years.
I smell a second hour.
No, we would have to test it in after hours for months before I'd even put them on a second hour, given how deep the scars are. Next question.
George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia says, at the risk of reigniting the OS wars, what is the best operating systems for Zoom production for smaller and for larger productions?
Rupert.
The OS wars are alive and well, but I think if you are using, if you're in the vMix world, then that's going to, you're going to put you in the Windows world for that. Doing a lot of work with PowerPoint, again Windows, or if you're in the cloud in AWS, again Windows. But if you're doing complex routing stuff in Audio Hijack, then you're going to be on the Mac platform, or if you're in almost any other creative pipeline like Final Cut or whatever, then again you're going to be on Mac Keynote, and then Zoom ISO, that might put you in the Mac world. So for smaller productions, you might make a choice, but I think big scale productions will almost inevitably have a blend of those things to just get the whole thing to work.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, read between the lines a little bit on what Rupert was saying there is you don't decide on the basis of OS, you decide on the basis of software. So if you have a particular software that you need to use, that will determine the OS, if it's available for your particular OS, or if you can run Boot Camp, which is done less more often. But I just happen to fall into the Apple camp. I've got PCs over here that I do a lot of my voiceover work with, but you decide based on the software you're working with, not necessarily the OS that you like.
Go ahead, Chris.
I've said this before, but I think one of my favorite parts about office hours is I now have friends all over the world that don't use Macs.
So you get to hear something different. I think that for price for performance, so we have more PCs doing Zoom work than Mac, because we were buying into a vMix idea that we decided wasn't valid after we tested it. So we ended up with I think we have 16 PCs that we use, and about 5 or 10 Macs that we use it for it. But the 5 or 10 Macs put more outputs out. So these are Mac Minis. These are what we're using here for office hours. So I would say price for performance at the moment is a Mac Mini with a Sonnet box with a card is going to give me a lot of capacity to do stuff. But if you're in a vMix solution, or you want to do that, then you're probably better off with a PC. Next question.
Next one comes from Scott Mueller, back from Germantown, New York, and he says, unfortunately, the Canon Rebel T7 that I got for Christmas last year doesn't have a clean HDMI out. What's the affordable upgrade to my Brio that can give me a soft background?
Go ahead, Alex.
This is probably not the right answer because you would have searched for this, but in case other people don't know, it seems that Canon do an EOS web camera utility, which specifically mentions the that camera amongst many that allow you to connect your Canon camera to Zoom and other apps like that for doing web streaming. So that's my answer. Because they used to also be Magic Lantern, but I don't even know if that's around still. So that's for your Canon.
Jeffrey?
I was going to say the same thing. The only problem was with the T6, T7, they create those borders around even if you do the USB. Instead of the Brio, give this a check. We found the Avaya. This is the Huddle Cam, except Avaya makes it. We have a feeling that Huddle Cam's made by Avaya. It's the exact same thing. I have it running in my desk. It's HDMI, which will give you up to 4K, and then it's USB if you need to use it in that case, and it'll give you some functionality with the remote. And it's about $169, so it's actually a little bit better than the Brio. Price.
It might be better price. I wouldn't say that the Huddle, even the Huddle I don't think has the better image than the Brio. So I think that there's a lot more features to it. So you have HDMI out, and you have pan and tilt, and there's a bunch of other things that the Huddle does. I think from a pure look, if you're looking for a soft background, you're not going to get it from a webcam. And so I think that the Sony makes these. I can never remember the numbers because I don't have this 4300, 5100, 6300, something in those range. So maybe someone can correct me there, but those are in the $400, $500, $600 range that will, I think, people look great when they come in over those cameras. So that's probably the most affordable one. Or is it the D50 or the 50D? Depends on whether you're Nikon or Canon, which one makes sense.
M50.
M50. The M50 is what, Courtney, you're using that, right? So that's another option that's more cost effective. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, you want to see glass on the lens, not plastic. The plastic will never get a decent bokeh.
Well, the real issue is the chip size. I mean, you're right that you won't get a great, but the thing that's really going to make a difference is how big is the chip. And you can't, the webcams are like 1/3 inch at best. Next question.
And no virtual backgrounds, please.
No, thank you. Next question.
Tlaloc Miguel Lopez Waterman in Astoria, New York, our friend on the show, says, we have been seeing a lot of amazing work with the combinations of Universe and Panasonic pan-tilt zoom heads for our shows and accidental theater. Thank you, Manolo. What options are available for other brands of PTZs, such as Lumens or Birddog?
Go ahead, Guy.
So some of the protocols are in there, like with the Birddogs, because it's a popular camera. Some of these guys are actually already putting it inside. So if we jump over to Universe, that there is control. If you go into the edit mode, there is that is a device that you can search here in all devices. If I go into show mode, what I've built here is just a companion on top. So this is just a web browser on top, and then I throw an NDI monitor down here. And if we go into show mode, now I can control that camera. And this is a remote down here with an IR learner. So I'm basically I'm learning the commands from the PTZ camera, and I'm programming those over TCP/IP. So basically I can be afar and I can shoot IR from my house into a network at the other end. So this is called a global cache device. They're like $119. But yeah, it's pretty cool that you can use these buttons to move around, and then if you want to switch cameras, like here's the where is it? There's the Atem Extreme. I can switch cameras, so you can see those buttons moving around, and then eventually these will be DMX controls for lighting or whatever else. You have some sliders, and maybe this will be a PTZ control as well. So lots of cool stuff that you can do in Universe.
That's great. Yeah, I think there's Isadora, and then the next thing, once we get our head around Isadora, we'll be moving the crowd to Universe and I'm glad that some folks are cutting the ground before we get there. Next question
is from a guy, right, who was just speaking in Seattle, and he says, how would you use the free Road Connect virtual cables with Zoom?
I'm assuming you're throwing that ball to yourself because I don't know what the answer is.
That's a kind of that's a second hour Zoom question. It was tagged Zoom audio.
Oh, okay, yeah. Let's go ahead. We'll cancel that and push it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. The actual question then is from Eddie Martinez in Palo Cedro, and Eddie says, looking for feedback on different network switches, specifically Netgear's AV line versus others. I'm currently using an 8-port Ubiquity power over internet system and need to upgrade.
Go ahead, Rupert.
There's a couple of folks, I think, in the community that have used the Netgear AV stuff. And my understanding of it specifically is it comes pretty much out of the box with an easy setup for VLANs, for NDI, for Dante, all that stuff. I'm not sure if they have a management tool that allows you to manage a whole portfolio of the switches together, like something like Ubiquity would do. If you're upgrading from Ubiquity to get more bandwidth, you need a bigger switch or 10 gig or something, then that might be one reason. But there's no reason why a Ubiquity network can't be configured to do everything that the Netgear AV stuff does.
Yeah, it's do you want a turnkey or do you want it to be more scalable? And I think that after a lot of research, I can't afford the Meraki stuff at home, so I'm probably going to start buying Ubiquity switches with just because it's probably the better solution for my home anyway. Go ahead, Rupert.
I meant to mention I plan on actually re-provisioning my Ubiquity network here probably maybe today. So maybe if I can announce that in after hours, we can watch along.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, keep track of that. You should keep track of the office hour, the alerts for after hours, because we'll let you know what's happening. So make sure to keep your eye on that in Discord. Next question.
Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York's up next. He says, would ZoomOSC or Isadora be able to somehow forward the chat from one Zoom meeting to another so panelists in a presenter meeting can see the chat from a presenter meeting without a third-party chat platform?
Go ahead, Guy.
Greg Gibson had this request with Andy, and behind the scenes they worked something up with Isadora and they have it working. So I would reach out to those two and they'll share that with you. It's pretty slick.
Yeah, ZoomOSC can absolutely look at the chat. And so it's just a matter of taking that chat and publishing it somewhere else. So it should be definitely doable with OSC. Next question.
Alex here on the panel, Alex 4D Goldner in London, says, has anyone got any experience in working with VUO, V-U-O, an interactive experience authoring environment? VUO.org is there. location.
I haven't. Alex, have you looked at it at all? Nope, can't hear you, Alex.
Sorry, pressed the wrong button. I was pointed out to it because it also can make plugins for motion. So it is like a kind of Quartz Composer-like thing. That's interesting to me, but obviously it's designed much more for this sort of interactive experiences, but also has NDI compatibility, so can take streaming video in and also out. So that might be interesting. But
Yeah.
I've only just started looking at it. I've heard of it mentioned over the last couple of years, but I haven't looked at it yet.
Yeah, that definitely looks like it'd be fun to check out, especially as soon as you had me at motion. All right, next question.
That comes from Paul Wallace here on the panel from Austin, Texas. What specific mounting hardware would you use to attach maker rails to a wall or ceiling? Pros and cons of wall, ceiling, floor mounting.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think it just all depends on whether you're trying to make load-bearing connections or whether you're trying to do that for support or actually to support weight. You know, anything that's going to take a load, you need to get at least into a stud if you're dealing with the stud construction anyway. And to find your studs, whether they're in the wall or the ceiling, this is the best stud finder I've used, and I've used a bunch from Franklin Sensors. So get one of these, find your studs.
Nice. I'm always looking for a better. How much does that cost?
It doesn't matter.
Right.
Doesn't matter.
It's worth
time. Time is all that matters. Yeah, because I get a lot of cheap ones and they never work. You always end up driving into the drywall, and you're like, "Dag nabbit." So that's Franklin Sensors.
Yes, I'll find a link.
All right, go ahead, Gordon.
And for the material I would use, they make this hardware strapping material, which is about 1/2 inch wide. It has holes every 1/2 inch or so, and it comes in a roll. And you can unwrap that and then screw through it, wrap it around, put a bolt through it or around the pipe, and then go to the wall and go into a stud. And you can move it up and down the pipe depending upon where you want to mount it. And the main thing it needs to support is to keep that keep the shelf from moving further away from the wall in an earthquake. So its flexibility to flex a little bit will keep it from tearing apart the shelves of the wall if things do get bumped or moved around.
Next question.
Andre Dalla is back from Berlin, and he said, what is the best cost-effective way to record and quickly play back panelists' Zoom sound checks to let them hear how awful they sound, having PC Max and ATEM Extremes to realize his vision here?
You said best, but not best for the low price. So I'm just going to tell you what the best way to do it would be what's called an EVS. An EVS would do it perfectly. So it only costs $100 and some $1,000, but it would do it. I mean, it would do it amazingly well. Like you would just be able to hit it right. That's how they do replays for sports. To drop that price down a little bit from the EVS, you can, one of the things to look at is there's a thing called M-Replay from a company called Softron. It's still thousands of dollars, but not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's designed for replay on a Mac. And then stepping down from that, you really, one of the things that you can do is have some kind of little external recorder, and basically just have an output that records to it, have its output play back into into your switcher if you have an ATEM or whatever, and then just feed it back to them. So that would probably be one of the least expensive ways to do it. You can screen capture, that kind of thing as well. Go ahead. Real quick, Mitchell.
Yeah, couldn't you just use the Zoom audio check? You record and then it plays it right back.
You want to be able to have control of video and audio and record it and then play it back to them, I think is the issue. And you also want to annotate it. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So vMix, Wirecast, they both have replay options that you could give that a try and put that onto another computer, have it replay, and then of course that would shoot it right back. So that would work.
And the thing to know is that this happens in I was thinking about this the other couple of weeks ago when I was watching my daughter was playing baseball and watching like the coaches coach, coaches that aren't professional coaches coaching kids on how to throw. As someone who used to play collegiate ball, like it hurts for me. It's everything I can do to bite my tongue and not say anything and just kind of watch it go through. It's just a matter of not knowing. Like you don't know what that, when you don't know, you don't know, and you don't, like there's no distinction there. There's no having to look at it. When I went to Zimbabwe, every piece of sculpture looked amazing for the first 2 weeks. And within 2 weeks, you were like, oh, this one's pretty good. This one's not very good. And everything else because I had distinctions. Like I understood what I was looking at. And so what we have is a lot of people that don't know what they're looking at. And so it's important not only to play it back for them, but to explain to them why it stinks. Next question.
Looks like Wacom Barons. I hope I'm getting that right. Duff, the Netherlands. He asks, where does all your old technology end up? The stuff that you replace being optimistic or that was just for testing?
Go ahead, Rupert.
So some of these totes back here may contain some legacy projects, but they were all successful experiments. But I find that I don't keep everything over time, just keep a select few things.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I have friends that benefit from my inadvertent purchases, and another friend runs a school. So a lot of my stuff ends up like an old 3D printer, and a few computers have ended up as donations to our school.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I also give stuff to my friends if I have multiples of, or I keep them right near the desk here so I can hold them up and demonstrate. Well, there's the MixPre 3 that I was using for a while, and there's the B-Link.
That's great.
Demonstrate on office hours is the answer.
Yeah. Next question.
Gil Carter in Brisbane, Australia says, I'm building a portable kit to send to remote conference hosts with limited AV skills. What USB mic would the panel recommend to get good coverage of discussions from a group in a medium-sized room?
Jeffrey.
Well, if you're doing one microphone, hopefully you're not doing one microphone, but if you are doing one microphone, something like a Blue Yeti would be an option, because then you have the different polar patterns that you can choose from. You can put that in the center of the room. The farther away you are from the voices, the more roomy the situation is going to be. It's going to be kind of really hard to understand. When I did any type of blogger panels, which was basically people sitting at tables all around in a circle pattern, I would put either a podium microphone or a area microphone within 2 to 3 people, and I'd have at least one per 3 people at the least, but one to 2 is usually the number that I did for that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Just to remember, you can't beat physics, and physics is still going to work on the inverse square principle. So if the person speaking doubles the distance from the mic, it drops by 4. If they go 3 times away, it drops by 9. It's just physics, and you can't get around it. So the best solution is always going to be individual miking if you can pull that off. I know it's a hassle, but that's when you get people who sound like their natural selves without a lot of room reflection and stuff that makes it hard to listen to your content over time.
Next question.
Next question, Joshua Minden in Madison, Wisconsin, has our last one in the regular hour. I'm working with a house of worship wanting to transition a 3-day retreat for 65 participants, which includes a team of 15 table facilitators who also will help present. Can the panel suggest a platform to make the experience easy for all?
Go ahead, Chris.
First of all, I'm curious about the mathematics of that. 65 participants, 15 facilitators, how that divides up into, I'm assuming, breakout rooms. I would think you should be able to do something like this with Zoom. Because your main question is, how do I make it easy for all? And most people in 2021 know how to use Zoom. If you don't, ask your 10-year-old. They'll show you how to do it. So you could do this all in Zoom. When you need to break out to your table discussions, your smaller breakouts, just use a breakout room. What I would do, if that sounds out of your comfort zone, is ask for help. Drop into after hours. There's also plenty of companies that have been formed that just do this. So ask around, but drop into after hours. Somebody will show you how to facilitate the breakout rooms. It's probably the best way to do it.
Next question. We're going to go a little over because there were so many with so many votes. So I pushed back once. I think I might have actually pushed back 1 or 2 audio questions. So, I mean, second hour questions. So look in your notes. If I push them back towards you, they're in your notes. So if you don't see it up there, go ahead and push it back in if it's audio related. But we had a bunch of them at the bottom. So we're just going to kind of do a little bit of a lightning round to go through a couple of these. Go ahead. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is next. Has anyone had any problems with the Tram TR50 mic on a Rode Go 2 transmitter?
Say that, and then I don't know what the answer is to that one. Go ahead, Guy.
It's probably a 3.5 millimeter jack that's wired for Sony. So even though it looks the same, the wiring might be backwards. And so when you plug a tram that was wired for Sony into a Sennheiser type wiring diagram like the Rode has, it won't work.
Bill, real quick.
That and phantom power. Check to see if you might need a phantom power stage in there to keep the tram activated so that it comes up in level.
Next question.
TJ Asher, Minneapolis, Minnesota, says, what's the best way to convert or conform my Blackmagic RAW to a format that Final Cut can use, such as ProRes? I want to shoot Blackmagic RAW because it's a bit more space efficient than recording in ProRes.
Take it into Resolve. So that's the best way to do it, is you take it into Resolve and you can convert them in mass. You can throw them all in a timeline, tell them to all export. Although I tend to go through and do first lights on all. I tend to take each clip and do it manually. So I bring in every clip and I set that and I color correct it for the ProRes, because the RAW is where you're going to have all the data. So you want to get close with the RAW before you export the ProRes. To me, that's the proper way to do that. It's not the fastest way to do it, but I open up each clip and I correct it so that it's close to what I want. Looking at scopes, looking at the color, and then I hand it off to Final Cut. And I can keep on, if you're exporting something out with a 10-bit or 12-bit export, you can go back and do more color correction in Final Cut. This isn't your final thing, but it just gets it into the ballpark and takes full advantage of the full stops that you have within the RAW format. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, here in the panel. I'm seeing lots of selfies online of people in their new homework setups from their new employers, complete with branded swag. Is this a great talent marketing technique? And who is posting selfies of themselves back in an office cubicle?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
None of the people on witness protection.
Yeah. I think that you're definitely, a lot of companies are starting to realize that they can poach employees by showing that they're able to go remote and that they're going to support them being remote. So you're going to see some companies trying to pull employees back in, and you're going to see other companies aggressively showing that they're not going to try to pull you back in. It's a really great wedge for smaller companies, because people have proven that they're willing to work for a little less, and definitely the same amount. You don't usually, if someone's at a big company, it's really hard to carve them out of that. They have what we call the golden handcuffs, which is their stock, and everything else. But people are proving that they are agitated enough about going back into the office that they're willing to move and even sometimes work for less than they were making before if they can do it on their own terms and at home. And so this is a boom for medium and small size companies, SMBs. I did that backwards, but SMBs to aggressively go after large corporation, because those people come with incredible experience that allows you to scale. So huge opportunity for SMBs right now to basically carve out real talent out of the big companies that are trying to, and that's why the big companies are responding and not, they keep pushing the date out. So they just keep on we'll see, because of the resistances, and the worst part is there's a lot of people that aren't resisting. They're not saying anything. They're just applying to other jobs. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up with our last one in this queue. What do you think would not only grow the Office Hour viewer base, but aid in truly realizing the original vision of Office Hours, a global conversation where no one's left out?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I think the best thing is just word of mouth to people that that can contribute to Office Hours, and then grow it from there, because it usually then becomes like was it the 12 degrees of separate? I always mess that up. The Kevin Bacon thing. So they'll find people, and then they'll be able to thank you. They'll be able to explain it to the next person. So these people don't come in cold, and that's the important thing.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, the proof is in the pudding. Once you see the variety of the questions that are being asked and where they're coming from all over the world, I think you're hooked. So I think it's already on the right path. People just need to, sort of get caught up in the whole thing.
Good, Alex.
Share, all people watching this, please share moments with specific time codes and the actual topic in your social media. So people actually, instead of saying watch Office Hours, you just say, here's an interesting discussion we think you might like, or I think you might like. Do that.
Yeah. We're going to try to do better at making that easier. But yeah, I think that the first step is to do what we've done now, which is we created a great show that has great content. we've got great people asking questions, great people answering those questions. All of that had to be figured out beforehand. Now we're tuning up the quality. The goal is to make a show that looks as good or better than most of broadcast, that combines that great conversation that we've already figured out how to do. At that point, we'll start bringing in guests that can potentially bring in a lot of followers, that are people that we can promote, and so on and so forth. We do that to some degree now, but we can turn the dials up a little bit if we wanted to. We just need to make sure that, and by the way, how we look and how we interact on the show and how we look with the post-processing, everything we're doing with Office Hours 2.0 makes it easier to bring a different, just keep on bringing people in with higher and higher profiles into our conversation. And that's going to create, I believe, a chain reaction. Then we have to, but at the same time, we have to figure out how we're going to absorb everybody. And so that's why we're still working on a bunch of those pieces. And so it takes time and effort to do that. And as far as a global conversation where no one's left out, it will take more than my lifetime to do that. Like we just have to make sure we're clear. It's not going to happen. I just want to manage everybody's expectation that we're, it's going to take a long time. It's a like a North Star, not like a destination we're going to go for groceries. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. How can production hardware and software vendors make their products more accessible to those with disabilities? It'd be interesting to use Isadora to enable a physically disabled person to cut a show using an adaptive interface, for example.
That's the way to do it. Is figure out how to, and I think as we move to more screens and less hardware, you can make more adjustments that take advantage of that process. All right. We are now changing subjects, a little late, sorry about that, but we're going to move on to talking about Zoom audio. So, we're probably going to go around the horn a little bit. I'm not going to, if someone can throw in a question and keep an eye on it, Bill, of just explain your kit. I don't want to put everybody on the spot, but if someone just throws in, one of our panelists just throws in a question that says, let's go around the horn, and then then the panelists can raise their hand in the back end. We have to remember to do that for these kinds of shows. There we go. John got one in. Here we go. Everybody got one in. All right. So go ahead, and we just moved that one over. Go ahead and let's, if you want to talk about what you're using. Okay, hold on. We got too many now. Hold on. There we go. There we go. Go ahead, Bill. Just use that one there. Answer that one.
All right. The one that just came in was from me, actually. Please explain your basic kit to the panelists.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's pretty much what we do in our mic check, but to give you a little detail, I was building the $15,000 to $20,000 room, so I had the option of going with whatever I wanted. So I started out with an AKG 414, which is a nice mic, and I put a little windsock on it just to keep the plosives out of the way. And over here, if I swing the camera around, it's an AFX channel, which I had sitting around. And the AFX channel was convenient because I needed a way to EQ and process the audio so it's consistent and sounds right. I probably would have gone with a Mix Pre if I had to buy something brand new. And then audio-wise, I'm going into a camera before it goes actually into my ATEM Mini Extreme, because the best way to keep the audio in sync is to go through a camera that's already synchronizing the video and the audio together and then outputting it on HDMI, as opposed to going into the mic input on the ATEM, which is not a good choice because they're noisy and a little temperamental because they're unbalanced inputs. And that goes into my M1 Mac, and that's the audio chain that works out and also is displayed here in my lower Fenwick.
Go ahead, John.
So currently I'm using a Heil PR40, which I got primarily because Leo used it. But now I've got it because the panel uses it and likes it. And it was an upgrade from my Yeti Blue, which is what I was using before. And then that goes into a Mix Pre 3. Again, this is a panel recommendation. I really like it because I have a high noise floor in my room. I've got a MacBook Pro that puts out a lot of fan. I've got a NAS that is continually writing in the background. I sometimes have on my Windows PC, which is a jet engine and at 12 dB noise reduction, it really, you can't hear it. You can't hear any of it. So I really love that. It was an upgrade from a Scarlett, and then it was also an upgrade from using the ATEM Mini, all of which were not sufficient for office hours. So that's why I went with what I got.
Go ahead, Alex.
About 8.5 years ago, Chris Fenwick kindly invited me onto his podcast a few times. So I thought I might as well get a slightly better microphone. So 8.5 years ago, I got this USB Blue Yeti, as previously mentioned by John. I got a slightly wider shot here, so you get some idea of how far it is away from my mouth. This is a typical coffee mug that you might want to use. It's only 1 inch more than the height of this mug away from my mouth, but as you can see, it's just not in the way of the shot in any way whatsoever. I did get a pop shield for it originally, but instead of using a pop shield, I just took past it a little bit like this, and it's plugged straight into a USB cable, straight into my MacBook Pro, and I'm using Zoom as my level. That's it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
All right. I have a large number of microphones and mixers and things, and I have a MixPre 4, which I tried to use. This is a version 1, so it doesn't have the ability to run noise assist. So the reasons why a lot of people are using the MixPre is because of the great plug-in for noise assist to reduce background sound. But since mine won't handle it, and to configure side tone so that I can hear myself in the ear, it's very problematic on the original MixPre 3, and you have to dive several menus deep to adjust it. So I ended up going with the old MixPad, which I had sitting on a shelf. It's like a $179 mixer, and it's analog. It's all analog, which I kind of like. I have the ability to, grab a knob and turn up effects or adjust the equalization or adjust the level easily. And if you see those two little knobs on the right there, the yellow one and the red one, they adjust the USB return, so I can adjust the return of the Zoom session on the top knob and the level of my earphone on the bottom knob. So I have independent control over those two levels, so I can control my side tone in my ear. And there's a one up here at the top. There's a one knob compressor on the top of the first two channels, so it allows me to add a little bit of compression into the sound without going too crazy, and I can adjust that on the fly without having to look down at a menu.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I'm using an Apogee Symphony, and I have to say I've been recording for 30, 40 years with 4 tracks and digital recording and mixers and everything else. And this is the most impressive piece of kit that I've ever seen. The sound quality is unbelievable. It's so clean and so clear. The noise floor is fantastic, and it has built-in effects. So I'm able to add a little bit of EQ digitally and a little bit of compression digitally. In my Zoom, you can print the effect. So I could print this to tape or print it to the hard drive, so to speak, or I can use the Apogee plugins themselves inside a DAW. So it's got a lot of flexibility. I've just scratched the surface on using this 80-page manual of all the different things that you can do. I'm using a cheap microphone. This is a $99 microphone here, condenser mic AT2020, but I'm able to compete with Mitchell and his Aphex because of the built-in compressor and the EQ. And how do you follow Courtney with his voice?
All right, go ahead, Sky.
I found them, the original Skull Candies. That was the origin story of joining office hours a million years ago. But I was able to slowly move into a Shure MV7 recommendation by Mickey, and Guy Cochran has that available at the DVE store, and it was within my price point and budget. I do not run it through my M3 MixPre 3 mixer at this time because I use that on set across town. I do run it directly into my MacBook Pro through the USB connection. I do not run it through loopback because I just haven't as yet, and I'm still getting used to what loopback how that helps me. So it's just going straight in. I use the little volume knob that comes with the MV7, and that's what this microphone. I like the sound of this. Now my audio listening devices, I'm probably going, I do have the audio implements, but I need to modify the earpiece, and that's the other part of the audio experience that I'm still working through.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So I'm using a Behringer XM8500. I guess it's Behringer's sort of version of the SM58, and that goes down a 2-foot cable into a Behringer 502, which is a little 3-channel mixer, so I can bring in other sources there and do a bit of EQ on this also, and then that goes on a 2-foot cable straight into the computer. I actually have a separate mixer for my outputs, which is where I have my monitor here, and then I have those mixers cross-linked so I can get side tone in my ear.
Go ahead, Bill.
So I started out in my voice booth because I do a lot of professional announcing, and that was years ago. I've gotten into a more complex thing since I needed to get out of that. So this is where I sit every day to do office hours. My mic chain, basically, real close here, is the mic is fed directly into a Rolls mic switch, and that's because since I do the questions, I'm constantly muting and unmuting and using the Zoom controls. I was making too many mistakes. So I like the tack button of it's either on or off, and I can touch it and figure out which. That's going into an Apollo Solo unit, which is a pretty high-end digital interface, and that's feeding into the laptop. And I'm not using the ATEM Mini for any kind of audio stuff, so that's basically my MKH416 into the mic switch, into the Apollo Solo, into the laptop, and out to Zoom.
Guy?
Yeah, the mic I'm using is a CAD E100S, and let's see, it goes into this here, which is the mix pre, and I've got you guys on USB 1 and 2, so this, if we click on it, the input's USB 1, and so I can hear you guys and kind of season to taste. If somebody's talking loud, I can pull that off, or turn it up, turn it down, and then I'm on 3, and then 3 has 9 dB of noise assist. I don't think I'm not doing any delay in here, so I could delay in here, but from here it goes into, pull up my lower Fenwick real quick so you can see. It goes into vMix, and in vMix I'm adding the delay, and I also, well, let me show you. This might go into infinity. Let's see what happens if I cut. Yeah, so I just added this road connect thing, so I can do, you probably heard me do some of these, rim shots and whatnot, so it's kind of fun to have that. So that just adds an input, and then in here is where you can go into the audio settings. It takes a second to pull up, but it'll pull up here. Come on. Did it go? Yeah, and here's where you can add some audio delay. So pretty basic setup.
Go ahead, Dennis.
So I am using an M Audio Nova going into a Zoom H6. The reason I'm using the Zoom H6 is because it works with the current version of macOS. I was previously using an M Audio Mobile Pre, but there are no drivers for the current version, so I had to switch. I'm using the Linsol KZ in-ears, which are being fed from the H6. I can show you that just here. And
as he quietly shows you his new Extreme.
Indeed. Well, that is that's the next step. Then the next step is to feed audio in via my camera through the ATEM in an attempt to make sure that everything's nicely in sync. But it then goes into Audio Hijack, which I have a bunch of things fed into so that I can do wonderful effects. and then into Zoom.
That's such a great effect. Anyway, yeah. I have this idea, by the way. I'm just going to throw it out there that we should rebuild the More You Know animation, without the MBC logo, and we should do it in HDR, and we should have it, and we should do the sound in surround. So HDR with 5.1 sound of, just this big thump, so that when someone says, when someone has like the best answer in the, for the thing, like once a week or once every couple days, you get like the big hit.
The answer of the week.
Yeah, exactly. Jingle. When we decide, like someone has to, it's like pushing the big red button in someone pushes down the button and it
you're going to Vegas.
You're going to Vegas. All right, Chris.
I'm using the same mic I've used for all of office hours. Like Mr. Gollner, I bought it when I started podcasting, and I'd like to say I went and I tested a whole bunch of it. It's a Neumann TLM 102. I'd like to say I checked a bazillion mics, but I went to Guitar Center and it was like semi-affordable at the high end, and I thought it looked really cool, so I got lucky. I think it works okay. The noise assist with the Mix Pre, I would highly recommend if you're on the fence, if you're wondering what it does. I made a YouTube video. If you search for Chris Fenwick and Mix Pre or Chris Fenwick Noise Assist, where I show it, and it's a good recording, and you can see how I'm adjusting it and how all the background noise in the room disappears. You should totally go check that out. It's very interesting, and it's the reason why I bought the Mix Pre. So along with what Courtney was saying, a lot of people want to use the noise assist. It makes a common room sound much better, and I'm really glad I got the 6 because excuse me, I thought I was buying. Yeah, I thought I was buying what? English much? I thought I was botting over my head, but as it turns out, I'm using all the inputs, all the outputs now.
Yeah. I mean, you can never buy too much. It's just what you could afford. Like it's because you always will fill. It's like a bag. I mean, mixers are like bags. No matter how many inputs you give them, you'll just keep filling them up. Like, oh, I could do this and I could add this.
But I'm really glad I have the extra outputs. Like, for example, I use outputs 7 and 8. It's Mix Pre 6. Did you know it had 8 outputs? I use outputs 7 and 8 to feed this mic and only this mic into Unity. So when I'm on comms, I'm not going to accidentally pump a bunch of extra stuff into comms. So it's a really powerful mixer with a really bad user interface, but it sounds good, and the noise assist makes it worth getting over the user interface.
Sorry, I was going to show you something, but then I knocked about.
Wow, what was that?
Great
you
sound
okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Sounded like you got in a fight with Edward Scissorhand.
It was the little turntable that I'm testing for USDZ stuff.
Doing your own Foley now.
And it fell off, and it's very noisy.
You had a sword over there.
You're wondering, it's very noisy. Anyway, yeah. So all I was going to do is my room is very messy right now, but I'm going to still show you this anyway.
Alex is doing a remake of the West Side Story with him fighting Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah, exactly. So just to show a little bit of it, and again, it's a little messy here. So of course I'm going into, and this is the Scorpio, which is total overkill, but the real thing that I use a lot right now is this Model 205. So what this is my mic goes into this, and when I push this down, now you can hear me again. So that is before it gets to Zoom mic. Now this is connected over Dante. So this is actually a Dante connection to my Scorpio. Now, what's cool about this is that I can have these wired up as well as Dante. And when I see that I disappeared, this is if I push down, I want to talk into Unity, and I push down, it will turn off my mic to the main show automatically. I don't have to think about, I got to turn this off and turn this on, and I got to do this and this. I can also have multiple inputs. As you can see, I can have 3 inputs where I have individual controls. So in one setup, I can be controlling my Unity, as well as having, listening to my side tone or the return from Zoom. So all of those things can be coming back into it. So I have a couple of different options there. The rest of it, that's it feels like overkill. And same thing with Chris said, but man, I got to tell you, once you have it, it's really hard to give up. That little box is magic.
You said that's Dante. So does it then go straight into your computer, or does your audio, does your voice go through your Scorpio?
I'm still going through the Scorpio so that I can do noise reduction, number one. And number two is it doesn't quite give me enough. It will show up as a Dante interface inside of it, but unless I'm using something like loopback, I don't get enough volume, out of it. So it's not quite enough amp for this mic specifically. And so now it also has an analog out. So if I wanted to just do analog, I could go analog out and into the Scorpio, and that would be fine as well. But it has the Dante. And the nice thing about the Dante is I can route things like Unity is easy. I just route it out to this, and so I can listen to it in the system as just another input. There's, it just shows up with multiple inputs, in the Dante routing. So I can route whatever I want into my ears, into this little box. And when I want to talk back to somebody, I can, again, it'll automatically mute. And what it does when I push those buttons down is totally configurable inside the control interface. So I can say, I want it to be opened, or I want it to be closed. I want to push the button down and have it latch. I want it to be momentary. I have all those things are controls that I have within the configuration. And so while it is expensive, it's like $800 to have this thing. It is, if you're doing the show every day, I use it in everything that I do, I use it all day. It's probably the thing I touch the most on this desk, is me, muting myself every time I take a sip of tea. The reason I got it was someone posted on Twitter that they could hear me gulping during our show, which I know I probably did for a year, and I apologize.
That may have
for
been
that.
me.
Yeah, someone said it anyway. So now you'll notice I'm pretty careful about. There hasn't been. I gulp every once in a while by accident, but I've cut it down by 90%. I've cut the on-air gulping down. It's a Heil PR40, obviously. BSW makes this little screen. You can't buy them from Heil. I don't know why Heil doesn't make their own screens, but anyway, maybe they don't. I think maybe Bob doesn't think that he needs them. So anyway, I've got a Ultima. This is the OC White Ultima arm, which is really nice. And then outside of that, then it goes, it goes into the it's a USB connection from the Scorpio. I am swapping the Scorpio out for a Mix Pre 3 because I want the Scorpio for other things. Like it's insane that I'm using the Scorpio for what I'm doing here. So I'm gonna wrap it out so that I can go do surround recordings, which I can't do with the Mix Pre 3. So anyway,
do you use your studio technologies as an analog device and not if you don't have Dante?
Yes, it has an analog in and analog out for the main one. You wouldn't without Dante. And by the way, Studio Technologies makes what I not grew up with, but the last 10 years I've used analog only devices that Studio Technologies makes. So they make tons of them that are just XLRs in and XLR out, and that's what I've used in the past. This one is just much smaller because it's just all Dante. You won't be able to get your other talkback channels in without Dante. You need Dante for that. But as far as the mic control, you can do that with analog. So it's pretty nifty. All right, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to also say sort of an honorable mention, if you will. It's interesting that many people on office hours are using the Flow 8. I don't think anybody here mentioned that they were using that mixer, and it's quite interesting and very intriguing. One of the things, Alex, you said that you were having trouble getting enough gain out of the Heil. The Flow 8 has a whole bunch of gain.
Yeah.
And so it's a shame, as one of our members here wasn't here to talk about that, because it's a very interesting mixer that a lot of people are using.
I think the big thing that keeps me inside of the sound device, I even have the Revelator, which I've been testing, but the big problem is without noise assist, I can't use it in my office. Like it's just too much surround noise that it's the killer app.
Do you know off the top of your head how much noise assist you have dialed in?
I have about 6. So it's so it's usually sitting
Probably
between
go
6
for
and 8.
7.
Oh, could I? I can do that. Oh, thanks, man. All right. I try to do it as gently as possible. Go ahead, Courtney.
One question that came up that I thought of on the hardware mute buttons, the Studio Technologies and the one that Bill has, does it enable you to use the Zoom mute controls so that if there's if there's someone as a co-host sees that you're unmuted when you're actually hardware muted through the button, that they mute you in Zoom, making you double muted.
Mine does not. Is the EMS 111? I'm gonna look like I'm not muted the whole day, even.
Yeah.
So it doesn't show up in the Zoom interface.
So and I might have that problem of a co-host or somebody seeing you muted and muting you. Thinking your microphone is open.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of tools that we're looking at adding, which will take some of that choice away to some degree. Now, Bill and I will probably stay unmuted, but we're actually looking at the possibility of things like when we hit answer, when I hit your name inside of Mukana, it automatically mutes all the mics except for the host and the speaker, and then it opens your mic automatically. And then as we go through that thing, it just shuts everybody. It just pushes everybody off except for the person talking. And so those are the kind of things that we're working towards. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Tony Mobley, our friend in Noonan, Georgia. He says, for elderly church members, what's the best low-tech microphone for Zoom worship services? Currently using phone earbuds and I'm not satisfied, so help.
Go ahead, Sky.
Yeah, there's needs more details in that question. But the Pile, of course, is the least expensive, and Roscoe uses that every day. So that way, again, going back to Brian Maddox's point, getting that voice from your perspective into their ears is what you're trying to do. So that's why getting a microphone as close as you can without, for what, $20 or less, the Pile microphone.
The big thing is that a lot of things that we used in churches, I mean, I grew up, that's how I learned audio, was doing audio for church. And we had, lavalier microphones, which sound fine in our understanding of it when we're sitting in the room with all the other things that are going on in the room. When we listen to it just over a stream, that roominess is, it adds cognitive load. And I'm just going to keep saying this every day. There'll be some comment of cognitive load. When you feel tired coming out of a Zoom, you'll notice that a lot of people can watch our show and watch ours, over Zoom for hours and hours and hours without it being tiring. And the reason for that is, number one, is that it's actually an interactive conversation as opposed to a presentation, which is boring in itself. But number two is that the bad audio and bad video, whether you notice it or not, your brain is processing it. It's going bad. It's okay. And it's trying to cut through all of those things. And that's tiring. Like over time, it tires your brain. And so, your brain is a muscle, that you can make tired. And so you have to, that Zoom fatigue is real. And so we really want to figure out ways that we can do that. Now, if you have a pastor that's sitting and talking to everyone over Zoom, probably the lowest impact on them is a shotgun. So you're talking about low tech. The question is it low impact on the person putting it on, or is it, do you have any time to set it up? If you have remote control over it, the lowest tech way that we do it with some politicians and so on and so forth is a speaker behind a shotgun mic with a Dugan on a mixer. Now that's not low tech. It's low tech for them because all they have to do is sit down and start talking. It's high tech for you because you have to actually build it and set it all up. So you just have to decide who is it low tech for. Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't tried this, so I'm not promoting it in this way, but I have found something. This lavalier USB microphone, so it's plug and play. It'll work in a Mac or a PC or whatever computer they're using. They can just clip it to their shirt. It'll get you pretty close. It's omnidirectional, and it would be easy for an elderly parishioner or a church member to just clip on, and when you plug it into most computers, it'll default to the USB incoming signal automatically. So,
right,
very little setup required.
Next question.
Tommy Johnson, St. Paul, Minnesota is up next. What's the preferred way to control others' audio over Zoom? Is there any hardware or software that you need specifically?
Yeah, there are different ways to do it. The way we do it is probably the heaviest handed, which is that we send a mix pre with a headset mic, and then we send a Mac Mini that is attached to that mix pre. And what that allows us to do is we have a Meraki Z3 that lets us just automatically log into them. So all they have to do is plug it into the internet, and we see Wingman, and we're able to, actually, see what's going on the other side. That's probably the heaviest handed way to manage that. But it works really well. And so, but the other way to do it is some version of, you need the mixer to be available online. And so you have to find something that's network accessible. The real unfortunate thing so far, one thing we've been looking at is the Revelator. That's why I have one, is that we're testing the Revelator as I just have a Mac Mini with a Revelator, which is less expensive, and then I can just screen capture in and control it there. What we're really looking for is a box that doesn't have any controls on the front. This doesn't, other than the Revelator, it doesn't really exist. What we really want is for it to show up. And Elk, is it Elk or Echo? We had them on. They had a box that looked like it was going down this path of, I don't want you to have any, I want to send you a box that I can control over IP that controls all the settings. And if you're on a home computer, you could log into it and control it yourself. But remotely, I can control it. And if I don't give you access, you can't control it. And there's no dials. And that's that's the holy grail for what we're doing. That isn't super expensive. $300 or $400 would be amazing. Go ahead, Rupert.
If you're dealing with contributors or people coming in on their worst case scenario, let's say built-in equipment, you may end up using something like TeamViewer or AnyDesk to try and dial in there and actually help them through their audio settings on their computer.
Yeah, Elk, we had them on elk.audio. We had them on in the past, and I don't know if their interface has been released, but they've got lots of cool things to look at on the website. We want to bring them on and have them talk about it again. Go ahead, Sky.
Is the XR18 available to be used and controlled over the internet?
I don't know. I think that if you'd still need some kind of VPN setup to tie it in. So you'd have to be able to see it over the network. But otherwise, probably. But you would need to have something to establish a VPN connection, which can be done with a Raspberry Pi. But the XR18 becomes a little bit bigger than you typically would want to send down.
Correct. I just
the form factor isn't there.
In relationship with Jim Hankins and Mickey, and so we might be experimenting with that soon.
Yeah, it's cool. Generally, I love the XR18. I mean, I think at that price point, it's the best solution, for that type of thing. Next question.
Guy Cochran's up next from Seattle. This is the one that was in early and come back. How would you use the free Rode Connect virtual cables with Zoom specifically?
It's a long pass down to the 20, and Cochran catches the ball. Cochran throws the ball. Cochran catches it.
It's kind of funny because just last night, Chirig and I were playing with this, and I'm actually hearing myself back. Are you guys hearing double me?
You sound good. No.
Okay. Let's be routing the virtual cables in. So basically, we were playing around last night with this thing, and it's pretty neat for free because you could go in here and you can choose if you have Rode mics, you can bring them in. But then you can also bring in virtual devices. Normally these would be down here, but you.
So is this doing a little bit of what Loopback would do?
Yeah, exactly. So basically inside of Zoom. So if we pop open a Zoom meeting and we look at our inputs, now we have a microphone will be the virtual cable, and you can also send out. You could send it out to speakers, or you can send it back into itself, which would cause a loop. So you want to be careful about what you do, but then you have these abilities to send in these different sounds, which you can put in these different pads and whatnot.
Anything with sound trombone is cool.
Yeah, and then you can actually record. So it's a free recorder, virtual cables, and little mixer. Play with it, see what you think. I'm sure you could come up with some uses for it, but the sound effects are kind of fun.
And can you put new sound effects in?
Yeah. So down here at the bottom, these pads, you just click on them, and then you can put in the name and load the file.
Is it cross-platform?
Yeah. So this is on my Mac, and then here's the PC version.
I don't know why, but for some reason when you started hitting it, it's got my whole thing. I don't want to make it annoying for office hours, but I was thinking all the little sound effects that we could do every once in a while, but we just can't do it too much.
All shiny.
Right. The gliss.
There could be a whole audio language that we use there that would be, for the kids.
I think Fenwick should be in charge of that.
Yeah.
Next question. It's all about timing.
Next question.
Moving on to Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. And Morgan asks, any suggestions for universal audio plug-in chains on an Apollo Twin X for Zoom or office hours? I'm liking the C-Suite CVOX for noise reduction.
I don't. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So you're into a world of complexity. I don't know if I can bring up my Apollo thing. Apollo has so many plugins, and one of their specialized areas of expertise is taking vintage plugins from the early days of audio and emulating them in the digital space really, really well. So you can go back and find Avalon preamps and the Manley Voxbox and all of these things that classically have had a sound that have been on thousands of records and things like that. And they often sell into the musicians community as opposed to just voiceover. But all those compressors and all those expanders and all those noise boxes are all in there. They usually do a great Black Friday sale though, but literally there are hundreds and hundreds of sample libraries and audio chain emulation libraries that Universal Oddity lets you hook into.
And we've got quite a few questions and not a lot of time because it's the second hour, and I have a hard out at 9. We're going to move pretty quickly for the next question. So let's stay on point for the next one. So next question.
Robert Soji, Los Angeles. For your pre-show mic checks, why negative 24 dB?
In short, because Mickey said it that way, and we trust Mickey. But the thought process that Mickey had, he's described it a little bit, was because it is where a level that everyone can comfortably hit. Some mics are different. Everybody's interface was different. We do get a lot of comments about it not being very loud. And so there is a chance that we may try to move that to negative 20 because we have a lot more professional mics now and better amps. And so we may move it up a little bit to adjust for the fact that I get a lot of comments about it. So as we move to we're going to kind of experiment with that. But right now that's because it was to accommodate, to make sure that all of us were the same, which we decided was more important than louder. Next question.
Larry Tang in Concord says, is there any reason why no panelists are using the Tascam Mixcast 4 podcast studio mixer or the Zoom PodTrack P8 podcast?
I think because none of us need to incorporate that many inputs. Also, both of those are, they don't have noise assist for me, so that's a problem. I don't find that the Zoom components are as at the level that I prefer. I've used lots of Zooms. I've owned lots of H4Ns. I've lost lots of H4Ns, destroyed them, put them in all kinds of things in other Zoom products. And I think that quality, having features and having the same quality of build is different. And Zoom produces a really good product for the price, but not necessarily the highest quality preamps and subsystems. Next question.
JHB in New York says, can you give an explanation of side tone, please?
Side tone is you hearing yourself in your when you're speaking. So you hearing what we would typically call a zero latency return. So if you hear any latency in the return, if it goes to the computer and comes back, it's still side tone, but it's really annoying. So as a zero latency, you that's what you want to look for in a mic or some kind of interface, is there's going to be a zero latency return back to you, so that you hear yourself without any delay. And so it just means that you can hear yourself and you can adjust accordingly to make sure that you sound good. It's very distracting when you first do it. And you're almost always going to start talking like this. As soon as you hear yourself, you immediately want to sound like radio. And so so that's what you fall into pretty quickly. And then over time you get over that. Hopefully, some people never get over it. But you hopefully get over some of those tendencies. And then it's great because you just hear what you sound like. Like side tone is really important to me because when I can hear myself disappear when I hit the mute, so I know that I'm muted or not muted. Next question.
Lou Perez in Phoenix says, any negative impact using the options for stereo audio and the high fidelity music mode with all Zoom meetings?
Go ahead, Rupert.
Just the risk you run here is believing that or relying on sending a stereo signal, and then for some reason, maybe your participants only receiving mono, maybe they've just got a mono earpiece, or maybe something went wrong in the chain, and they're not receiving what you believe you're sending, which can lead to some either confusion or problems or whatever. And maybe in some very highly contended bandwidth situations, you may see some performance, but it's just those risks that you run.
It's also it will also oftentimes you can make a mistake, and I've made this mistake where I go into stereo and I'm only in the left track or only in the right track because of how I routed it. Next question.
Rupert, who was just answering, is asking, can we discuss the importance of wearing headphones to avoid open speakers in conferencing applications like Zoom?
Go ahead, Sky.
Absolutely. Yes. If you have the material and media and equipment available, because that way you limit the possibility of feedback. Unfortunately, I had to work with what I had at the moment, and we do have an open speaker on the Matt in the Kitchen platform. It's just, it's not because I'm lazy. It's just because that's the equipment we have, and feeding additional mics into the talent, headphones into the talent is just an additional expense that we currently don't have. So yes, is it important? Absolutely.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And if you don't have echo cancellation turned on, everybody on the panel will hear themselves coming back at themselves through that speaker if your microphone is open. So
there's also the other thing is that you when you have echo cancellation on, when you start talking and someone else is talking, it will actually push their mic down. So it actually creates when anybody has any open speakers, it actually creates a lower quality across the entire thing because it's now doing this auto mixing thing because it's trying to avoid that echo cancellation. It's also carving pieces out of that audio. So there's a whole beyond just the echo, it's greatly reducing the quality of your audio experience across the board. An open speaker is we do it when we're pushed into a corner, but it's only when we're pushed into a corner with a knife and a gun and a missile. Is the only time we'll do that. All right, next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia says, is there a way to reduce sound in the background by Zoom H6 and Heil PR40?
Go ahead, Bill.
The two quickest things, first of all, you're using a Heil PR40, which is not a condenser mic. It's a dynamic mic, which is helping you initially because condensers are so sensitive, it's harder. Eliminate the background noise if you can. If there's air conditioning or a fan on, turn it off. And then there are noise assist and other kinds of electronics that will suppress that sound. They do it technically. Those are the best things I can tell you.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. How do you connect to the MixPre remotely when it doesn't have an Ethernet interface?
We have a Mac Mini that it's connected to via USB-C, and then we screen share to the Mac Mini and control it via Wingman. Is how we can't control everything. We can't control volume and everything else, but we can start and stop record. We can see what our levels are. So it's not a perfect situation. Again, it's something that I think is sorely missed in the pipeline that we don't see anywhere is a completely remote controllable, simple interface that we can send out to folks. Feels like a big market, but we haven't seen anybody to actually do it. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas. If someone really wants to use a lavalier, what might work well in Zoom?
The big thing is getting a better interface. So the lavalier will do better when you have things like a noise assistant in line, so a MixPre. And then you want a high quality lav. So, if someone really wants to use one, we use DPA's lavs, so we tend not to use cardioids or supercardioids because they tend to have a lot of sibilance and if they get bent, if they get turned at all, you're now in mixing hell. So we still use Omnis, and I just can't think of the name of them off the top of my head, but we use Omni DPAs, and we try to get them, pretty close to the person, oftentimes a little off center so that when they breathe down, they don't breathe into it. The BBC, if you're using an Omni, will always turn it upside down to avoid that. I was against it for a long time, and I think that they might actually be right that you get rid of a lot of the noise and you don't actually give up much in the audio. But the BBC will always turn the mics down to make that happen. It just looks weird because if you look at any BBC stuff, you'll see all the lavs are turned down instead of up. And then but using something that is a high quality preamp and a high quality processing will take you a long way. Go ahead, Bill, and then Courtney, real quick.
Lavs also need a little bit of current usually to work, either phantom power or even bias voltage. And sometimes mics will, lavaliers will have a barrel with a AA battery in there to provide that bias voltage. You must use that if it needs it and you don't have phantom power supplying the power.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and that one I showed earlier, and I put it in the chat. This eliminates all the problems you're going to have of interfacing an electret microphone to your interface and powering it and everything, because it's all built into the plug right there. Your entire USB interface is right there in the plug, and the microphone says it's 192 kilohertz 24-bit codec, so it should be high quality, although I can't vouch for its sound because I haven't heard it. And it's only $23 with the extra 15% off.
I'm sure it'll be amazing. DPA is looking right over their shoulder. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, up next. Why is Bluetooth a bad idea for Zoom or other such platforms?
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a bad idea if you have something like this. This is a Blue Parrot. And I've heard guys on office hours in the mobile using these that's almost sound as good as the panelists using high-end gear. Fenwick's laughing at me right now.
Through a small speaker, across the room, they sound almost identical. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, along with limited bandwidth, the other problem with Bluetooth is that you get into latency issues. Most Bluetooth receivers are very low power, and every time I've tried to use something with Bluetooth, the monitor is really latent and I can't use it.
For comms, they're great. That's what they're designed for. I mean, that's what it's really good for that. For actual call, for actual calls that matter, I wouldn't use Bluetooth because it also just really can fall apart, quickly and jump to other things and have all kinds of problems with it. So as general communication, I think Bluetooth is great. As a mission critical pipeline, I probably wouldn't use it unless I had to. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, why would you swap the Scorpio out for a MixP3 when you have to add another D to A to D stage without Dante?
The reason I'm going to switch it out is because the Scorpio is a $10,000, the most amazing field mixer ever made. And I have it sitting on my desk when I could be taking it out into the world and capturing great things. And so the idea and there's been times when I have to tear apart my system because I'm like, we're going to do an interview and I'm going to take the Scorpio and then I have to come back and I have to reconfigure it and I have to do all this other stuff. And it's the most amazing mixer ever. And it's like having a Ferrari and just driving it to another parking lot every day in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. So it's just stupid. So anyway, and I've used it for this long, and I'm happy to have it, but I got to do something better with it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, currently the Waves SoundGrid driver does not work seamlessly when directly routed to and from loopback. If I used Audio Hijack Pro as the final output stage into Zoom while using loopback virtual devices, would I be creating AV sync issues?
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I would give that a try, but also I would contact Rogue Amoeba, and they're very responsive, and tell them the problems you're having with your hardware and software and see if they can't come up with a fix for you.
Next question.
Rodrigo in Stockholm, Sweden. Rodrigo says, would you use loopback Audio Hijack to add VST and AU effects or prefer digital effects from a Midas Behringer digital mixer for Zoom participants when ingesting their audio for live stream?
I would always want to use a hardware solution as opposed to a software solution. So I mean, I'm always going to tell you that when you have software, it's so easy for your computer for you to ask your computer to do more than it's capable of. That's the real issue. And if the CPU the CPU is constantly moving resources around, so it's not just that app asking for more. If something else if something says, hey, I need priority right now, I'm going to go do something else, and your Audio Hijack doesn't now have the priority, you end up in a situation where it takes it away and you start losing sync, you start having breakup. And we've seen that with the software processing. So it can work most of the time. And if that's all you're using it for, or you're using it for very little things and you don't have a lot of background tasks and it's sitting there at 15-20% capacity, you're probably fine to use software. But you just want to be careful it's really common for people to overtax their CPU and suddenly have it start trading resources and throwing you off. Go ahead, Bill.
Exactly what Alex is saying. I've had circumstances where in my old laptops particularly, not anything new in the last 5 years, but because some of them were slower to process, if I added up 2 or 3 different things pinging the CPU constantly looking for I/O, I would get errors and things would not work as well. in the newer machines, they're so fast, and particularly the M1 Max are so ridiculously overpowered that things like, I wasn't able to drive the 7 screens I have in front of me until I moved to the latest MacBook Pro before the M1s. I finally got enough GPU bandwidth to drive all these screens successfully. So you could be one generation back and in trouble when you add that next processing unit, and newer, more advanced computers help you eliminate those kind of problems.
It's a great conversation. We end a little early because I didn't have faith that we could get through the questions that fast. We had so many questions and we were like 8:43. I was like, oh, we're going to run way over. Even after starting late. So we burned through a lot of questions. Great work by the producers, keeping that conversation forward. And thanks to the panelists for sharing everything about what you're putting together and sharing your knowledge with everybody every day. It really makes a difference. It's what we're doing here. So thanks. We can't do it without either one of you. So as groups. So it's really important. It's a very unique show. Remember that tomorrow we'll be talking about small kits, $5,000 and below, and what would we build into something smaller if that's what we had to put together. So we'll have that conversation. So that should be a lot of fun. And then also a reminder that at 2:00 on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I get to stumble through Isadora with Andy and Tlaloc and Elle. So we'll be continuing that as we slowly build towards this multi-switcher control system that we're all building together. So it's a lot of fun. I'd highly recommend coming to check it out. All right.